Today is my spine's 11th birthday. I know that sounds weird. Let me explain. I get a lot of questions on why I had to have a C-section and why I had to be put to sleep to have a C-section, and this would be why. So, when I was 12, I was diagnosed with scoliosis, and if you don't know what scoliosis is, it's when your back or your spine is basically deformed and it curves a lot. So, I had 3 curves. I had one in my neck, one in my middle back, and one in my lower back. My middle back was my worst one. And at first it was 50 something degrees, I don't remember exactly, and the bottom was 20 something, and then my neck wasn't bad at all. They ended up fixing that with chiropractic care. I went to the chiropractor for 2 years. Basically, I would leave school in the evenings and I would go straight to the chiropractor 3 or 4 times a week. This continued for about 2 years, and we started to notice that my back started looking worse. My pain got worse. Nothing was getting better, and it was just this really bad situation. Well, my chiropractor the whole time is telling my mother that I'm doing great, that everything's getting better, my back's getting better, but at the same time, she refused to show the x-rays to me or my mother. I can't believe I've never told this story until now. After a while of this, my mom had enough and basically told her to show the x-rays or we were leaving. And my back had went from a 50-degree curve to an 85-degree curve, which is bad. And then my bottom, that was a 20, went to a 50. So my curve had progressed 30, whatever you want to call it, and it was so much worse than it was when we went in. And I'm not saying it's her fault. However, she did not tell us that it was getting worse. She actually kept lying and saying it was getting better. My ribs at that point were actually about to this is so weird to talk about. My ribs were actually poking into my lung, which is why I was having a hard time breathing. I was having a hard time doing anything. And I was a competitive dancer. I did dance for my entire life at that point. And I was dancing 5 days a week, probably doing competitions, recitals. I was on dance teams, so I was dancing for that. Like I was constantly dancing and I was having such a hard time with breathing. And turns out that's why I'm literally having a rib going into my lungs, and this woman was lying to us about it. At the time, spinal fusions weren't very common, at least not where I live. I did know that it would be a pretty massive surgery, and I did not want to do it at first. I had been bullied. Oh, God, here we go. Oh, how much of the sob story do I want to share? Throughout this whole time, I was bullied by some girls that I danced with because my back looked funny, because it did. I mean, I had a huge like hump in my back. My back was deformed. My body was not normal. I mean, if you didn't know what it was, it looked weird. Like I looked kind of funny. And anyway, I was bullied by these girls. I was constantly crying. And finally, we're sitting here just deciding if I should have this surgery or not. And looking back on it, it wasn't a decision. I had to have it. Definitely a mandatory surgery, but my mom made me feel like it was my decision to make me feel better about it, I guess. But one day I went to school in the middle of trying to decide what we're going to do, and this girl made fun of me in front of the entire classroom, and I came home squalling my eyes out. I was crushed, okay? I was crushed. And I remember my mom was driving me home from school, and I literally just sat there and I told her, like, I'm having the surgery. Like, there's no way around it. I don't know how long it was. Probably a week later. We were in touch with a surgeon down at Children's Hospital in New Orleans. And we got an appointment in with him. He saw me and he immediately told me I had to have surgery, like, as quick as possible. So on February 1st, today, I went to Children's Hospital and I had the surgery. And I don't think anybody could prepare me for how hard the surgery was going to be and how hard the recovery was. The surgery itself took 10 hours, and I was in the hospital for a week. And I had a nurse coming in to like flip me over so that I didn't get like ulcers or anything, like laying on one side. Um, I think I ended up losing around 15 to 20 pounds in that week because I just didn't eat. I couldn't eat anything. I actually grew 3 inches overnight. Fun fact. I went from being 5'2" to 5'5". So that was it. That was funny. I think that's the fastest anyone's ever grown in their life. The recovery is by far the hardest part and the hardest thing I've ever gone through. And I've had a kid. It's from here. My scar starts right here. It goes all the way to my hips. So my entire back was cut open. I have 2 rods, 19 screws, and a hook that holds my back together. They would come in every, I don't know how many hours, every 4 hours, I would say 6 hours maybe, and they would do an x-ray. And let me tell you, this x-ray was the worst part of probably this entire thing. I remember this to this day, uh, 11 years later, and I could still feel this pain. Like, I have never felt pain like this ever in my life. They came in and they would put this, like, hard X-ray thing under me, like this board, and they would have to lift me up. And like I said, my entire back was just cut open, and I literally they had to lift me up. It felt like I was about to fall apart every time they did this. And I remember just screaming in pain the whole time they did this. And that it's not even that they did anything wrong. It's just like it was you had to lay on a hard board with an open sore. It just was not. I mean, you could imagine. When that finally stopped, I was able to start walking. Well, I didn't expect to have to relearn how to walk. My goal, I was in the ICU, so like my goal was to make it to the end of the hallway of the ICU. And when I got up, I remember like I had my dad on one side and I had one of the nurses or doctor, I'm not sure what he was, on the other side, and they had to try to walk me down the aisle or down the down the aisle, down the hallway. And it's like my nerves weren't connected anymore or something. I really don't know what it was, but like I truly had to relearn how to walk. I remember consciously having to tell myself right foot, left foot, right foot, left foot. And I had to do that a couple times a day until I could finally get up and walk. My parents are saints. That's all I have to say. Like, I could not shower on my own for a couple weeks. I couldn't really do anything on my own. I couldn't put my shoes on my own for a couple weeks, probably a month at least, until I could put my shoes on by myself. I couldn't get dressed by myself. My mom had to help me with everything. I had a bell. My parents got me a bell and they got a bell and they would like make me ring the bell. I had to get them to come flip me throughout the night. So multiple times a night I had to call my mom or my dad in there to flip me in my bed because I couldn't lay in one spot for too long because it was excruciating pain and I had to just keep moving. Finally, I got to the point where I could get out of bed by myself, but that took a while. All that aside, I was out of school for 6 weeks. I had to be homeschooled. And even after that, I went to school, but I had to get like checked out. I only went half days for probably 2 weeks after that. So about 2 months out of school. Fast forward all these years later, 11 years later, I look back on this day every single year because to me, I see how much I've grown since then because back then I was bullied, I was upset, I was constantly crying. I did not wear any tight clothes at all. I was afraid to be seen, basically. I felt like I needed to be in my shell, nobody looking at me, no one paying attention, and yet now I do social media for a living. So I don't know how that went to there, but that's where we are. So I look back on this day every year because it always is like crazy to me how much everything's changed because when I was 12 years old, 14 years old, whatever, I truly thought that was just like the end of it for me. Like I thought I would never be happy again. So when I got pregnant, I immediately knew that I was gonna have to have a C-section. I accepted that forever. Like I've always known I was gonna have a C-section. I really wasn't all that upset when it was confirmed when I got pregnant that I had to have a C-section. Like I knew that was coming. However, what I didn't expect to happen was that I had to have a C-section asleep. So I was not awake at all during my C-section. I was put to sleep. They had tried the epidural. They actually tried 2 or 3 times. The epidural didn't work. They couldn't get to my spine at all. Like basically the rod was there blocking it. They couldn't get to the spine. So I had to be put to sleep. Afterwards, after I had my daughter, I cried for like a couple weeks because I didn't get to hear her first cry and I wasn't there. I feel like I wasn't there when she was born, which obviously I was there. But it was a big thing for me. That's probably the biggest heartbreak I've felt since having the surgery. But anyway, I've been meaning to make this video for a very long time. This is actually why I started doing social media because of my story and everything that I went through. Because I remember feeling like I really wanted to help other people going through this because this was something that at the time I didn't know anybody doing it. Now I hear more things about people having spinal fusions, and they actually have spinal fusions like at different hospitals around me now. It's just great to be able to share my story, especially 11 years later. 11, 11. I'm getting old. That would be my story, and happy birthday.